call me Charlie, Hartley from PaleBlue.energy. So yeah, we're very excited to have these speakers on board and look forward to hearing from them tonight. One request that we had from our young professionals that signed up to this was actually, can we do a quick round of just CCUS 101 so we make sure that we're all clear on the terms that are being used today. So I'll do this very quickly, but essentially CCUS stands for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And so what you see here is a cluster of an industrial cluster where CCUS might play a role. So you can see the first part, carbon capturing CO2. There are kind of three parts to that. One could be capturing it from point sources like power plants. You could also capture it from the atmosphere using through sustainable bioenergy with CCS, which is also called DEX. And then the third method would be to capture it directly from the air using direct air capture technology. So that's on capture side. Then on the infrastructure side, basically it will get transported by pipeline or ship to a storage site, and our speakers will tell you more about that. Then the third part, which is the U, stands for utilization. This is where you use CO2 to make products like synfuels and building materials. And then finally, CO2 storage, where it is injected into the ground and permanently stored for long periods of time. So that was just very quickly CCUS 101. These terms will be thrown around, and I'm sure there'll be opportunity to ask much more detailed questions later. So that wraps up the introduction. I'll stop sharing my screen because we're all tired of looking at teams. So I'll pass it over to Mide, who will lead the panel discussion.
Thanks, Anthony. My name is Mide, and welcome everyone to our CCUS event. So we're going to have two sections here. We're going to look at the opportunities and the challenges. So we're going to start off with the opportunities first. And I guess my first question or comment to our panelists is the fact that how effective is CCUS as a technology in the decarbonization tool to achieve net zero, to achieve a net zero economy? Is it more than hyped up than it is, or actually it's not been hyped up enough if you factor in the fact that there are some sectors of the economy that are to decarbonize, like for example, steel industry, cement, and other industrial sectors of the economy. And also in terms of the effectiveness of CCUS as a technology, are there geographical variations, if any, bearing in mind that some countries are higher up the energy transition ladder compared to others? So maybe we can start off with you, Charlotte, and then the other panelists can chip in their views.
Yeah, thank you, Mide. Big question. Stripping it right back to your question, is CCUS essential? Probably an obvious answer from me, but yes, I think that CCUS is critical. The Committee for Climate Change have stated that it plays a key role in decarbonising, and particularly in reaching some of the hard to decarbonise sectors which cannot be met by renewable electricity generation or other renewable applications. So that would certainly be kind of my answer. I could just stop there. Is it essential? Yes, 100%. I think so. Is it effective? Yes, again, I think so. It is particularly effective in tackling some of the sectors which cannot be decarbonised, particularly energy intensive industries where a hydrocarbon is a feedstock for a production process, particularly steel and cement manufacturing. And what makes it effective not only as a decarbonisation method from a scientific perspective, like an engineering perspective, is that it allows us a way to continue to have these types of industries in the UK. Well, I'm work for a UK-based project developer, but really that applies all over the world, is that it allows us to keep having to sustain industry, which we currently rely very heavily on for manufacturing, for fuel, and other industrial processes which otherwise would just shut down. There's I think it's good to bear in mind that there's a really, really easy way to completely eradicate CO2 emissions, and that is to globally shut everything down. And we'd have no emissions, we wouldn't be doing anything. But we also wouldn't have an economy, and we wouldn't have trade, and we'd have a whole host of other really significant challenges, which just makes the notion of shutting it down completely unfeasible and completely like a complete fantasy. So CCUS plays a really critical role in there. It allows us to decarbonize, and it allows us to continue with elements of our lifestyle as we know it, and ultimately to keep people in jobs.
Yeah, I think I'll just chip in here, Charlie. I think the really key part is the hard to abate sectors. I think that is kind of sometimes not quite realized in the public domain quite as much. You know, the low hanging fruit is the electric power network in the UK. It's, you know, relatively simple to decarbonize that, wind, solar, batteries. You know, the hard to abate sectors, that are energy intensive, cement, steel, you know, it's actually, you know, how do you actually abate if you really genuinely want to get to net zero? And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, what the government did by setting and legislating net zero rather than just an 80% target means that you really have to get to zero. There's no oh, we're the last 20%, oh no, we're the last 20%. It's no, everyone's got to get to zero. So you need to start thinking of other technologies that are potentially expensive. Let's not beat around the bush here. They are potentially more expensive, but you have to use them, and that, I think that's really where carbon capture comes into the fore. It's not, you know, it is not the golden bullet or the silver bullet to solve all the world's problems. That's not what we're saying here. But in these hard to abate sectors, it's really one of very few tools in the arsenal we can use to get to net zero.
And I'd throw in on top of that the hardest to abate of all, transportation. If you look at the cost of decarbonisation across industries, transportation is by far the highest, through in-sector pathways up to $1,000 per tonne. There is no technological pathway to net zero for long-haul aviation to 2050. So direct air capture, which is effectively a tailpipe sucker of the emissions from planes, is absolutely essential to get to net zero, and give those negative emissions to balance the output. And for direct air capture and permanent storage, you need CCS as well.
I think just picking up on the point Ben was making around the costs and the expenses. I often hear, you know, CCUS compared against the rapidly declining costs we've got from alternative renewables like wind and solar. But I think there's a real distinction, and we kind of need to move away from comparing CCS with renewable power generation, because CCS is effectively an essential enabler for keeping industry going, and enabling, you know, cement, fertilizer, ammonia, all sorts of those technologies going. CCS is effectively an essential enabler, and I think we need to kind of see that narrative moving away from comparing it against solar and wind. And on that cost point, I think it's also worth bearing in mind that wind and actually solar have a real head start on CCS as a technology, and many years of innovation and spending already. Whereas we're kind of, with CCS, we're at the very start of that curve in terms of bringing the costs down.
Yes, I agree, Bilal. And I work for a carbon capture technology provider. We speak to lots of people who want to decarbonise glass manufacture, steel, cement, all the industries that the other panellists have spoken about. And for many of these companies, they have a decarbonisation roadmap, and they're looking at a mixture of renewable energy, fuel switching, electrification, looking at how they can create efficiencies across their entire supply chain and within their process. They're looking at carbon offsets, and they're looking at CCS. So it's very much a part of the solution that includes all of these other solutions and technologies.
Yeah, thanks for the comments. I mean, I think one thing I've taken up from this point is the fact that in as much as we want to have an energy transition, we can't run our economies to the ground. So CCUS is one. CCUS is one of those places whereby it allows us to, at the same time, keep the economy going and at the same time achieve energy transition. So thanks for those. The other one we'll be talking on opportunities is in terms of jobs. Obviously, it's talking about job security. I guess in terms of for new people coming into the energy industry, is CCUS and a part of the industry they should be actively considering in terms of for employment, and also in terms of people already within the industry, say for people within the hard carbon bits, say for example like coal and oil, you know, does CCUS do they have the same ready skills that they can easily transfer from the existing roles into CCUS? So I will start off with Amy, and then if we can, if also the panelists can comment on that.
Yeah, so I'm representing Carbon Engineering, which does direct air capture. So I'll maybe comment on that side, and then a few of the others are more the experts on the transport and storage side of things. But I think carbon dioxide removals will be one of the great growth industries of the next 30 years or so. Every scenario that the IPCC looks at needs gigatons of carbon removal. So it really gives you that trajectory. And then if you look at the skill sets that were involved, maybe just starting on the engineering and the operations and maintenance side of things, each megaton plant that we're rolling out requires a couple of hundred people to run and operate it. In the engineering, a kind of 2 to 3 year feed and then build. It takes thousands of construction jobs across directly the plant and also the supply chain. So absolutely, I think it's the same skill sets that are coming from more legacy industries. And then so yeah, it's the supply chain we should recognize as well. And then you've got the business development side of things. Like, these business models don't exist. How do you reward negative emissions? How do you reward reductions? Like, how does that work in a voluntary market? How does it work in a regulated market? Like, we've got all of those things to figure out as well. So the people that work more on the business and the commercial side of things, a whole host of new problems coming their way as well.
I think, if picking up on the back of that, Amy, I think on the other side, so at BP we're developing the Net Zero Teesside and Northern Endurance Partnership projects with significant focus on quite a significant transportation and storage system for CO2. And if I look at the team we've got working on this, we've probably got around about 60 or so people, multidisciplinary team, all the way from subsurface specialists, engineers of various disciplines to commercial folks. Probably the vast majority of that team has come from legacy upstream and downstream hydrocarbon backgrounds. And I think for the most part, those folks have made that transition into this space very quickly. So there's a huge amount of transferable skills that are really applicable from those businesses and those sort of historical experiences that are kind of completely relevant to what we're doing with CCUS. And actually, I think there's also something around, if I look at the team, there's real conviction about what we're doing, because it's compelling to be working on something that's directly contributing or going to contribute to the UK's net zero vision. And I think we need to capitalize on that sort of compelling aspect of working on these types of projects even more as we look to bring in more talent.
Yeah, I think just adding on to Bilal's point, again, I'm going to be a bit boring and follow. We basically work on the same project, so apologies. But if we take just on the jobs bit, you know, I'm really enthused by this, because if we take fundamentally why the government doing this, if we take a macro view of Teesside and CCS and creating these industrial hubs, what you're doing is creating a decarbonised industrial centre cluster, as they call it. So if you can have a system which is in place to offset, take people's carbon, and there's a business model that's set out and likely it's going to be regulated, so the costs won't be exorbitant. We're going to potentially be in a place where, if the UK especially is leading in this space, we're going to get companies knocking on our door, and we already do, saying, guys, can we come to Teesside and decarbonize our steel, cement? You know, so we're going to get huge amounts of foreign investment potentially coming to the UK, where previously this just wasn't the case, because we are able to offer that green decarbonized solution that other countries just don't have, and don't have the ability to give other companies. So, you know, if we can get to a space, and this is why carbon tax is important, if we can get to the panacea of the carbon price for venting the CO2 is above the abatement cost of actually putting it down the wells, then it's an economic decision, a market decision, to come base your company here to create jobs rather than vent the CO2. And that is surely exactly what this is all about. So, you know, I'm really positive, and actually on a jobs point of view, it's not just the jobs itself, it's the third party and the secondary and the tertiary jobs that come with foreign investment, which could in the future be really big in the UK. So I'm really positive in that sense.
Yeah, I really agree, Ben. We speak to lots of people who really recognise they need to do something about the CO2 emissions. They have this, you know, moral, legal duty to get to net zero. But there's two big questions: how are we going to pay for the plant, and what are we going to do with the CO2? So by these clusters being developed, it provides a solution. We've got something to do with the CO2. We can store it underneath the North Sea, or in Liverpool Bay, or up in the Acorn. Forgive me, Charlie. What's the name of the storage location up in Acorn?
It's the Acorn CO2 storage site.
There you go. So the one in Scotland. So now we have something to do with the CO2, and then as soon as we have a carbon tax which is sufficiently high, higher than the cost of CCS, then that answers the question: how do we pay for it? Coming back, Mayday, to your question about jobs, there was actually a press release today from the government agreeing a deal with the oil and gas industry to transition to a clean green energy while supporting 40,000 jobs. So it's really great to see that that government support is in place to ensure that transition and maintain job supply chains, and ensure that it's just for everybody involved.
Yeah, totally. I think finally, obviously, kind of to wrap up this thread of discussion, is Pilby. I can really speak for us as a case study. Last year we secured private international investment, and in the last 12 months, 18 months, our company has grown fourfold. And that is a key signal to the changes happening in the kind of employment opportunities in this space. And I think that for anybody who wants to work in the low carbon industry, however that is defined, there is a job for you. If it doesn't exist now, wait a year or two, it is coming, because the economic opportunity and the work required to get us to net zero is so significant. And in terms of transferable skills, what again is that we're a transport and storage development company, and we are, we work with a lot of people from the oil and gas industry, because ultimately we're dealing with a pipeline, drilling a well, and then injecting something down. It's very familiar to a lot of the existing activity that's happening in the North Sea basin. So if you have skills in that area and you're thinking, how can I use them? Just imagine the gas going in the other direction and you're there.
Great, thanks. So you heard it all, start applying to CCUS jobs. At the same time, while you're working, you can be saving the planet. I'm going to open it for a few questions before we move to the challenges. So maybe just one or two questions from the audience. So just feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself if there are any questions from the audience.
Yes, I do actually have a question.
Okay, great, thanks.
So to the person who mentioned that transportation is also one of the heavy carbon sectors that CCUS can tackle it, and that there's no, at the moment, any technological advancement for long-haul flights. So what I wanted to add to that as a comment is that to reach to net zero, we don't necessarily have to do all the processes as without any emission or carbon emission. So carbon trading is still an important factor in the net zero 2050 targets. So essentially the country can be, or the business, for example, can be investing in renewable energy technology elsewhere. Basically getting some carbon credits and then trading that for the emissions from the long-haul flights.
Yeah, I think it was me who said transportation. Yeah, I think so. The way that I'm talking about removals being used to offset those flights, so it's kind of a 1 + -1 = 0. That's your path to true net zero, and it would be those removal units as credits that would need to be traded to hit true net zero. You can, of course, use renewable electricity elsewhere, but to make 1 into 0, you have to have a -1, and that -1 has to be burying and permanently sequestering the carbon that's there. So yes, absolutely using markets, but I think the things that would have to be traded would be permanent removal units.
Great. Any more questions? Okay.
Sorry, Media, I had a quick question, and it might be more directed towards Ben and Bilal regarding are you seeing any sort of incentivization from the UK government in terms of CCUS, in terms of supporting what you guys are doing in terms of R&D, or is this purely having to be generated from the profits that you're making from typical traditional hydrocarbon production?
That's a good question. I'll take it, Bilal, if that's all right. It's actually really well timed. So I think last week, actually, or maybe beginning of this week, there was actually some innovation funding announced from a body called the ISCF, whereby they, and actually, Charlie, I think they got awarded some as well. So across the industrial clusters, the government essentially have co-funded some front-end engineering design studies with us. So essentially a third, 2/3, a third from the government, 2/3 from industry private backing, and that enables us to do exactly the types of things you're speaking around, doing R&D research to get the capture facilities in the space where they are investable, they're fundable, that we understand it, we understand the costs, and fundamentally that's the critical thing to be able to invest, to take the FID decisions to actually execute the projects. So yeah, I think the government are in this space, and I think it is a bit different to last time. A lot of people with the legacy. I'm fortunate not to be old enough quite yet to have been part of the other CCS projects, but those projects, just to give a bit of background, that have failed previously, and there's many incarnations in the UK government where they haven't backed it, and because of that, there wasn't that sort of seamless public partnership with the private sector, and they didn't progress. So actually, this is a new stage, and we are very closely aligned with the government. The government have understood this and have learned their lessons. So there are not only the public-private funding, as I've just mentioned, there's also the sort of business models which have been created and have been published actually, which are being developed hand in hand with industry. So ideally, the thought process being that if we understand what they're developing and they understand our needs, we'll get business models that reflect reality and therefore can move these projects forward.
Thanks, Ben.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Speaking from the perspective on that from a technology developer, we've been supported hugely by the UK government in the development and deployment of our technology over the past 10, 12 years since the company was founded. And Ben spoke about the ISCF funding. There's also the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, which is currently open. There's Innovate UK funding. There's funding available from the government that's just been released. Just been announced, sorry, which is the Net Zero Innovation Fund. So that will fund a range of different streams, including the CCUS Infrastructure Fund. So in total, I think it's about £1 billion that the government have pledged to get us to net zero, and it's offer support across a range of different sectors. Is it enough? Probably not yet, but it's certainly a very good step in the right direction.
Great, thanks, Helen. That actually leads us nicely into the challenges, because what we're going to talk about was financing, in terms of how easy is it for CCUS to secure funds from the financial markets, from private equity. Does it need more grants? Does it need more subsidies? Because as you said, it's a quite expensive technology before achieving economies of scale. Obviously, also in terms of the financing, how does policy play an issue? Obviously, here in the UK, the government last year launched the 10-point strategy for the Green Industrial Plan, and obviously CCUS was a key part of it, with it being a $1 billion infrastructure fund. So as you already touched on, like, the government has learned its lessons from previous years. Maybe that's why CCUS was a key part of the green industrial revolution this time around. So maybe if we can just continue on that, Ellen, to say, do we need more of that, or has the government done enough? And again, how easy is it for the private sector to support, given how expensive the technology is at the moment?
I think one of the challenges at the moment is that the government support which is available, it's great for funding new technologies to get up to pilot scale. And then there's also funds which are available to go into feed studies for more developed technologies. What I'm really hoping to see from the CCUS Infrastructure Fund is something to bridge the gap. So to go from TRL 6 up to TRL 8. And of course, that's the big risk, going from pilot up to your first commercial project. So I think that's a gap which currently needs to be filled. You're right, Midday. It isn't inexpensive to develop these technologies, and government support is needed. But I think that the current structure that they have in place through the Net Zero Innovation Programme is a good one, and it does cover a very wide range of sectors.
And maybe a different perspective also from a technology provider, but in direct air capture. We're at that commercialization stage, and I think there's a huge amount of interest from the private sector in funding. In particular, when you look at the kind of plants that we're trying to build, 1 megaton, you're talking infrastructure investors. Those infrastructure investors are very happy, but you need to have a guaranteed revenue stream, or at least a low risk revenue stream to come from doing the plants. So our real challenge is, what is that low risk revenue stream? What is the business model that pays to remove carbon dioxide from the air? In the US, we're managing to build our first plants because policies like the Californian low carbon fuel standard allow you to have direct air capture in there, but in the UK that doesn't exist at the moment. So it's, what's the policy, what's the obligation to move CO2 from the air? Once you can see that revenue stream, the plants get built.
And I think just to add, if I look beyond the funding that the government's sort of kicking off to help us through the front end engineering phase, the key question is, what is it that's going to get these projects across the line all the way through to the final investment decision? And that really boils down to government providing certainty on the business models, which I think Ben and Amy mentioned earlier. It's about that certainty which provides confidence to the investors on the returns and the risks and how they'll be managed. So that's really fundamental, and government certainty on those business models is going to be really important, as particularly as this year progresses. And then I think the second thing is really about getting potential project finance, so banks effectively comfortable from a technical perspective about the technology and the technical risks that they're likely to invest in. And I think that's incumbent on those of us who are developing transportation and storage systems and capture technologies to continue to engage with those financial institutions regularly, and sort of really talk them through what the technical risks are and how they'll be managed. Fundamentally, as Charlie was saying earlier, transportation and storage is really everything the oil and gas industry is used to doing. It's just the gas flowing in the other direction, and that's the frame we need to be talking about this with project finance and the financial community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The only thing that I would add on top of that is just a bit of an observation about the policy environment in contrast to previous attempts to kickstart this industry in the UK. That, you know, without meaning to come across too blunt, but it would just be, I think we're at a stage with the global climate emergency where it's too damaging for the government to renege on this commitment. And I think that is something which is a real driver and motivation for both government and private finance, industry and private finance to move this forward. As I mentioned earlier, we've attracted private finance in the last year twice to move this forward, which is showing, and actually our inward investment has been from Southeast Asia. So that's really like showing an interesting global perspective on how this technology is developing and how the positioning in the position in the UK is. So I think it's an important thing to bear in mind that what the key difference between the environment that we're in now versus the environment that those who bear the scars from previous CCS projects in the UK are in is just the social landscape and the, you know, we're all aware of all of the like activism that's taken place over the last few years, which has been such a powerful force in getting this stuff moving forward. And I think we'll probably just see that increase. And when CCS and hydrogen are up and running, it will probably just move on to another technology, which may be in its early stages now or may not have been invented yet.
Thanks, Charlotte. And then we move on to possible environmental, health, and safety issues. There seems to be some concerns on whether, you know, CCUS has any negative issues to the environment. Are those concerns are they rightly justified, and how can those concerns be addressed? Because, for example, I know we are storing, you know, lots and lots of tons of CO2 into old and depleted oil and gas fields, into disused pipelines. I think the UK started to store 10 million tons of CO2 by 2030. Is it just, are we just kicking the can down the road? If anyone who wants to start for can go ahead to comment on that.
I'll go. I didn't speak in the last one.
Okay. Thanks, man.
That's all right. Personally, I think that it's a misplaced worry. I think, firstly, if we use the same analogy about transport and storage, so the storage of the CO2, and we're currently transporting methane in the other direction. You know, CO2 is an inert gas. Methane is highly flammable. So, you know, we have the experience in the North Sea, especially, to deal with gases. And, you know, actually, if anything, CO2 should be easier to deal with. There are other added complications, of course, but in general, I think it is a safe operation. Clearly, safety will be number one priority whenever we're dealing with this gas. But I do think that it is something that we are able to cope with and manage with. And in terms of environmental storage, you know, again, use the same analogy. Oil and gas has been in the ground for hundreds of millions of years. The likelihood is if we choose the right stores and have the right subsurface, we can do the same thing with the CO2. There's no reason to say it wouldn't.
And there are examples of CCS projects which are currently running and have been run. So there's the Sleipner fields in Norway. It's a project, I think, in Algeria. There's many projects in the US and Canada where CO2 has been successfully captured, transported and stored. And a lot of these sites are being continually monitored. So it is well proven, it's proven to be safe. And I think that's a message that we really need to get across to the general public. There seems to be, from some public engagement work that I've been involved in, there seems to be a link between CCS and fracking. And I think that's a really damaging misconception that we really need to overcome. Transport of CO2 is safe and the storage of it is safe. And if you think about the long-term storage, CO2 is actually heavier than methane. And if we're injecting CO2 into a depleted natural gas field, that natural gas has been there for hundreds of thousands of years. There's absolutely no reason why the CO2 won't stay there for just as long.
Yeah, I think it's worth adding on the back of that, and I'll declare very clearly that I am not a scientist, but CO2 changes over time. So again, there's another misconception that or concern that CO2 when injected will just leak and rise to the top and come into the water when stored offshore. But as Helen said, it's monitored over a long time, and eventually the composition of it changes, and eventually it sinks to the bottom of the storage site that it's in, and it solidifies. So eventually there'd be nothing to move.
Yeah, and that nicely brings us into the last bit of under the challenges into the public perception, which we've already touched on. From this is the fact that maybe as an industry, does the industry need to do more, to do more to make people more aware of the benefits of the credits of the technology and how safe it is. I don't want to use the word PR, because it seems like you're trying to sell something, but does actually just need to get better? Because I think usually engineers and scientists are not good at talking about what they do and the exciting things they're doing. So maybe the industry needs to get better at that, and so that maybe those concerns that people do have can be addressed.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. I think that there is a big job to be done on public perception, and I say that as someone who works day-to-day in communications and stakeholder engagement. I think in particular, two of the concerns which are coming up is using CCS as a way of prolonging the oil and gas industry. That is a major one that we see coming up, and we're not even a hydrocarbon business. So the guys at BP might be able to comment further on how that's impacting their organization. And secondly, there is generally something that we're coming up against is renewable technology versus everything else. And what we really try to communicate is that, as I mentioned earlier, the scale of climate change and the kind of global climate emergency that we're in, we need to move past this either or approach and just move into, we need all of everything available to meet net zero. So those are the two key public perception challenges which we see arising from the ACORN project and the Scottish cluster perspective. And I think those are the two areas that need to be kind of worked on a UK-wide basis.
I think fundamentally, you're absolutely right, Charlie, and we get similar sort of comments. The fact that BP is an oil and gas company transitioning into becoming an energy company. We do get similar comments that this is just about prolonging the oil and gas industry. But I think fundamentally this comes back to what the argument we started with, which is why is CCS essential? And it's not about oil and gas. This is about keeping industries going, keeping essential industries that we're not prepared to shut down tomorrow, or even sort of in the next 10, 20, 50 years. We need fertilizer, we need cement, we need steel. And if we want to keep those industries going and keep those jobs where they are and grow those jobs in the UK, then carbon capture and storage is really an essential technology. And I think we all collectively really need to be working to get the public debate to that space, rather than this is sort of competing against other renewables as a technology for funding.
I think another challenge is that a lot of people don't even know what CCS is. The climate change assemblies, which were held last year, showed very little support for CCS, but actually very little understanding of what it is. And I think that presents actually an opportunity. There are a lot of people who don't know what it is. So if we can educate people into what it is, why it's so necessary, there's an opportunity there to shout about all the benefits that it does offer whilst educating people.
And I think from my side on greenhouse gas removal, the most common challenge is, why don't we just grow more trees? And our answer to that is, we love trees. We do need to grow a lot more trees, and we should grow as many trees as we possibly can. but you run into scalability challenges, and there's just not enough land available to build, to grow enough trees to solve the problem that we're now in. And I get back to the 1 ± 1 that I've talked about before. To get to 0, for every ton that comes up from the geosphere, you need to be putting a ton back in the geosphere, and that's why you need permanent removal solutions.
Thanks, Amy. I'm conscious we've run a bit of time, so I'm just going to take just 1 or 2 questions from the audience before I hand over back to Anthony.
I have 1 question. Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I have 1 question. Who owns the carbon dioxide when it's going into the ground?
Do you want me to take that? I'll take that one if you want.
Yeah.
It's a great question. This is the fundamental crux of the entire CCUS argument. So well done. You found it early on. And it's fundamentally, it's got to be government. And so let's just take BP as an example. BP is not in the game of taking 10,000-year CO2 liability risk. And that's fundamentally it. That is this. If we use an analogy, nuclear waste is very similar. Who is the long-term liability for nuclear waste? It's governments. It's not companies. It's not private entities. That's not in anyone's business models to do that. So, in essence, the long-term liability has to sit with governments. And actually, if governments aren't willing to take that risk, that CCS just won't be done in that country. It's kind of as simple as that. That's my personal view, but.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more final question from the audience.
Mira, I think since we're running out of time, would it be
cool.
we jumped into the next section?
Okay, cool. Cool. Yeah, cool.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you, and thanks for a very interesting discussion. So before we move into the next section, I just wanted to say a housekeeping note. If we could please remind everybody to mute themselves and please turn their videos off. It's not because we don't want to see your faces. It's a bit distracting when the videos flicker on the screen. So please turn them off for now, and then you're welcome to turn them on during the breakout sessions. Great. That being said, we're going to move into our rapid fire Q&A round. So the committee and I have prepared a few questions to ask our speakers, and the intention is for us to try to put them a little bit on the spot, ask them a pointed question and see if they can answer it in a couple of sentences. That would be ideal. And I just want to remind everyone that the speakers are speaking on their own behalf, so not as representatives of their companies. So just have to put that disclaimer out. And I'm lucky to share the section with Max, so we will alternate the questions. Before we kick off, we wanted to just show an example of the structure of this part. So I'll ask a question for you, Anthony, and then you can try to keep within the time, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question for you is, what's a controversial opinion you have about something energy related?
Yeah. So I get a bit annoyed when I hear people say electrify everything. I think electrification is great, should be a priority, but it's not a silver bullet. And I actually think there are quite a lot of areas where we still need a step change in technological and commercial innovation. So yeah, that's my answer.
Super. Thanks, Anthony. Good luck. Okay, Max, do you want to kick off the first question?
Yeah, hello everyone, and yeah, my name is Maxim Kotinev, and I will start with an opening question to the full panel, but probably starting with Amy. In your personal opinion, so what do you think is the hardest or the most challenging thing about carbon capture, utilization, and storage?
For me personally, and it might be directed by being direct air capture, but it is the business models, and it's getting people to think about the business models now rather than in 2 years, in 5 years.
And for you, Bilal?
I think for me it's the public perception. just the fact that public doesn't understand what carbon capture is as a technology, that's got to be the hardest thing we've got to deal with, I think.
Okay, Helen, please.
Speaking from a technology perspective, some of the biggest challenges involve applications with very low concentrations of CO2, not as low as Amy's company will be capturing in the air, but things like aluminium smelting or natural gas-fired power. And in addition, it's for industries where we want dispatchable power, so where the power will, and the carbon, the CO2 streams will be switched on and off over times. It's quite a challenging thing to address from a technological perspective.
Okay. And you, Ben, how do you see the most challenging, complicated thinking?
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate Amy's a little bit boring. It's the commercial business models and getting the governments to agree to long-term liability for storage.
Okay. Okay, very good. And you, Charlie?
Yeah, same business models all the way.
Business. Okay, then.
Thanks so much. Okay, so for our next question, it's related to net zero. And this question is for Charlie and for Ben. So the UK has passed a net zero law and has announced an ambition to capture 10 megatons of carbon a year by 2030. Do you think we'll meet the target? And if yes, does that mean that we should be more ambitious? Ben, do you want to go?
Yeah, this is controversial. I think we're going to smash 10 million tons a year. We are going to do it very quickly. I think you're going to get this wall of emitters. The second that you say you're ready, you're just going to get everyone wanting to pile in. So yeah, I think we should be super ambitious. Triple it, double it.
Yeah, I agree. Likewise, be ambitious. I think we're going to smash it. I mean, Acorn, we're one project and we're planning to store between 5 to 6 million tons per year by 2030. And there's 5 projects in the UK. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and again, as we said, so yeah, public misconception is quite high for all. But for you, Ben, so if you share your opinion, so what is the biggest public misconception you think about carbon capture?
I'm going to say elephant in the room. It's big bad oil maintaining fossil fuels.
And we need to change that.
And we need to change it because it's not a promise.
Can we get Bilal on that one too?
Yeah, I think it's just a lack of understanding. I think people struggle to get their heads around how carbon capture works, and I think a lot of people still think it's about it's just about direct air capture, which is really important, but it's much more than direct air capture. So I think it's simplifying an explanation of how the technology works.
Okay.
Great. Maxim, do you want anyone else on that one, or should we move on?
Yeah, move.
Move on? Okay, great. So question for Amy and Helen. If Elon Musk gave you £100 million for CCUS, what would you do with it?
For us, we want to go to commercial scale now, so we'd use it towards feed and then build.
We are very much hoping that Elon Musk will give us £100 million as part of his X Prize. We'll definitely be applying. And with that, we want to get to our first commercial project. So a size of about 100 to 200 tonnes a day. So far, we've got the technology to a pilot scale of 1 tonne a day. We're looking at some projects that are like Drax that are 10,000 tonnes of CO2 per day. So what we really need to do is demonstrate the technology at the intermediate scale. So £100 million would pay for a very nice intermediate scale project. Thank you very much, Mr. Musk.
Excellent. Well, good luck with your application.
Yeah, that's fine. So big money if it's coming from there. But what would you say if, to a taxpayer, for example, who says, why are we spending so much money on storing a waste product? So something that is already wasted. So how can we easily explain, in a few sentences, is this? So I can direct this question to Bilal and Helen again, probably.
Yep, I think it's about keeping jobs going, keeping industries going. It's as simple as that. That's the reason why the investment is important from a kind of economic perspective. And then the other reason is you just don't get to net zero without carbon capture. So those are the two fundamental arguments.
I think that you have to compare it against the cost of doing nothing.
Okay.
The Red Cross released a report, I think last year, which looked at the cost of doing nothing, not only the expense in pounds or dollars, excuse me, but also the human cost. And if we don't get to net zero, the costs we're already seeing the impacts of climate change, and it's only going to get worse.
And Charlie, Charlie, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the Red Cross report, but I was thinking, the cost of climate change mitigation versus climate change adaptation, and that's in terms of the amount of money that's spent on things like flood defences and all the other things which need to be done, as well as lives and lifestyles. So, yeah.
Thank you. So my next question is related to the U in CCUS. So for utilization, I will direct it to Amy and Bilal, please. What is the most exciting CO2 derived product in development, in your opinion?
So I'm a long-time aviation person before I came to carbon engineering. So for me, the answer is going to be sustainable aviation fuels, and actually what comes after that, green hydrogen. Because if you can take carbon dioxide from the air, combine it with green hydrogen, you make an ultra low carbon drop-in fuel that's compatible now. Not only can you fly planes now, you also bring online a green hydrogen industry by giving it a first offtake market. So for me, by far the most exciting.
I think one of the most novel uses I've heard of, which is under research at the moment, is to develop protein-based fish food from carbon dioxide emissions, which are captured. So that's a pretty wacky one, and it'd be really cool to see that materialize.
Great, thank you, Maxime. Do you want to take the last question?
We'll probably go with the final question, and to the full panel. So how do you see it? So what's the one thing that you want the listeners to take away from today's session on about carbon capture and storage? So the one thing that they remember. We can go around the panel, and let's start with Charlie.
Oh, tough question.
Yeah.
That there's a job for you there if you want it.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, Ben, please.
I think it's got to be that it's part of the solution. Like anything in life, it's all about a mix and a balance, and it's part of that energy mix in the future.
Okay. Helen, Emmy, Bilal, please.
I would say go and talk to your friends about CCS, tell them what it is, explain its benefits, help us really get that message across that people need to understand and be educated about this technology.
Great. Bilal?
For me, I think it's about the vision, the fact that we are really moving ahead with this at pace in the UK. I think the vision we have of doubling, tripling that 10 million tons per year target, it's absolutely possible, and we've got the projects and the people that are able to deliver that scale. So that would be my takeaway.
Okay.
And I would say we need brains. Come and talk to us. Like you've heard about all the challenges we've got. This isn't all worked out. Come and talk to us.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. All great messages. Thank you. And Fran, I think we've run out of our prepared questions, but there is time for more questions. So thank you to the panel for this part of today's talks. And now we move on to the breakout rooms. We will be split into 3 separate rooms randomly. And again, if some people want to join another room, so they can go back to the main room and then they can be assigned to a new room. But otherwise, in each of the rooms, we'll have 1 or 2 panelists and yeah, again, 1 or 2 YPs, so to help to moderate the questions and answers. And again, this will be the time for more interaction, to ask more questions. So yeah, please stay involved for that session, and at the very end we'll come back to the main room yeah, for wrap up and yeah, to discuss the conclusions.
Thanks, Max. I think Jim might have a short announcement before we move into breakout rooms.
No, it's okay. Max has done a more or less completed the job there. But yeah, anyone who does want to sort of hop to a different room, you can head back to the main one, and I'll be here to reassign you. So I will start the rooms now. Here we go. Opening them up. Hopefully didn't cut anyone off mid sentence.
We have practice from last week's event.
Exactly. Good. All right, I'll leave it with you, Anthony.
Okay, everyone back? Hope everyone had a fun breakout room. I'm personally quite sad I couldn't be in the other ones, but I had a fantastic discussion with Amy. So yeah, first of all, just a massive thank you to the speakers. This has been in the works for a while now. We initially reached out, I think, 2 months ago. So thank you all very much for joining and for sharing your experiences. Yeah, speaking on my own behalf, very much appreciated and learned a lot. Then also a big thank you to the event team, again, for pulling all this together on top of our day jobs. And then finally, thanks to the participants and for engaging. I can't speak for the other breakout rooms, but definitely in the one Amy and I were in, there was a lot of activity. So thank you again. And then finally, just some PR marketing side of things. So yeah, so the YPN, we actually had 2 events this week, so it was very intense, but we had good turnout both times. We'd love to hear your feedback, so please do sign up, join our social media, sign up to our mailing list, and let us know what you thought. Our vision, our aim is to educate, connect, and inspire the next generation of energy professionals. So hopefully you are benefiting from that, and you'll see that through the campaigns that we'll be launching next month. So next month we won't have an event, but we'll be running a couple of social media campaigns around COP26, fireside chats, bunch of stuff on LinkedIn and Twitter, and yeah, we really look forward to engaging with everyone. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and wish you all a nice evening. So thank you. Leave it at that.
Thanks
everyone for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.